everyone. Good morning. Ooh, we up early today. If you're catching the replay, I don't blame you. But we are really excited. October is a month that is there are a plethora of different kind of cause awarenesses that we're paying attention to this month. It's Infant and Pregnancy Loss Month. It's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Yesterday was, or the day before was the World Mental Health Day, right? But it's also Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and so I am so pleased to have with me today two wonderful clinicians who are going to share and talk with us today about um, interpersonal violence during the perinatal period. And so, my introductions, I like to let my guests speak for themselves. And so, I'm going to let Dr. Leslie Davis and Miss Maria Guerra introduce themselves a little bit, tell you a little bit about who they are, where they're from, and like what brought them into caring for women and families during the perinatal period. Let's start with Dr. Leslie.
Hi, I'm Dr. Leslie Davis. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and a national certified counselor. And I'm located in the St. Louis region, but I'm licensed in both Illinois and Missouri because I'm right on that border. And what brought me to serving this population is I currently serve as a therapist through Washington University of St. Louis.
Oh,
And I work with heart moms whose babies have congenital heart defects, which is very special to me because I'm also a heart mom. So I get to give my personal and professional experience all in one. And I think all my life I've really been interested in this population, just helping mothers and babies and children. And I think over time, it's just like my natural path that I've been on. So I'm excited to be here today.
thank you. Go ahead, Maria.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And my name is Maria Guerra. I'm a licensed master social worker, and I'm currently working in New York in the Mount Sinai Hospital. I'm a pediatric social worker, specifically focusing on asthma work, which is really interesting. I didn't think it was going to end here, but for the majority of my early career, I've been working with women and children, more specifically with children who've been impacted by intimate partner violence and domestic violence. So a lot of my early work focused on that. And it wasn't until recently that my interest for perinatal mental health sparked. During my work, I saw a lot of families who did express having little to no support during their pregnancies. And during my work, I got to see all of the impact that these families and children were suffering as a cause of intimate partner violence. So it's just been a passion of mine personally. I've been a survivor of intimate partner violence. So this is just really a topic that is very dear to my heart. And I continue, even at my work now with asthma social work, I do see a lot of families who continue to be impacted by this. So I'm just hoping to reach a broader audience and continue to educate and help these families.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both for being here. So you used the words partner violence, Maria, and so we've seen that abbreviated as IPV. Kind of the older lingo was DV or domestic violence.
Hmm.
What is intimate partner violence? What is domestic violence?
Sure. Yeah. So, throughout this conversation, I will be using both words kind of interchangeably just because a lot of the times the public gets used to, using one word over the other. But I think intimate partner violence kind of encompasses any type of violence or pattern of behavior in any romantic relationship. So you don't have to be married. You can be a partner of any, gender. So it's any use or any behavior to maintain control of or power over an intimate partner. And it can be any type of abuse. It doesn't have to be physical. It can be sexual. It could be emotional, psychological, reproductive, which is a lot of the things that I have seen during my practice. So like lack of access to safe sex practices, to any economic type of abuse, language that is used to humiliate and injure your significant other. So those are some of the things that can be considered intimate partner violence.
Okay. Dr. Leslie, anything else to add or any distinctions that you see or have seen between IPV and domestic violence?
Yeah, I do want to add that intimate partner violence, again, she mentioned, it's with the romantic relationship. That's the criteria for that. And domestic violence, the difference there is that that can be violence that happens in the home with different people with different backgrounds. So it could be mom and dad, it could be parent and child, it could be any other household member that is using the force of power and control intentionally to harm someone. And she mentioned like it could happen in different ways where it's physical, it could be sexual abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, even financial abuse happens.
Hmm.
So that there's that clear distinction with domestic violence and intimate partner violence.
Okay, yeah. So domestic violence then could, of course, impact the children. It could be, but it could also be older children in the household abusing younger children.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Thank you both for that. So, Dr. Leslie, I don't know if in your work you've had the opportunity to do this. I'm sure, because training as a clinician, as I am right now, um, with some of the clients that I work with, there is interpersonal um, violence happening between them and their partner, or there's a history of that, or they most of them grew up in a household where there was domestic violence, right? And even through pregnancy, with younger siblings watching their mother being domestically abused or physically abused or berated by another partner in the home. So what effect does interpersonal violence or domestic violence have when we're talking about the perinatal period and perinatal mood disorders?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. There is what's called the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. And that is one of the questions on there, asking the person if their mother or parent had experienced violence at any time. And that can include when that person, when their mother was pregnant with them. And so
Mm-hmm.
violence impacts a person even during, while they're in the womb during pregnancy. I can speak from personal experience. I experienced intimate partner violence right after I had my son, just 2 weeks after he was born. And during that time, I remember I wasn't necessarily worried about taking care of my baby. I was trying to get myself to safety, both of us, but he was in the hospital at that time with his heart condition. And so when you're experiencing intimate partner violence during the perinatal period, it can really pull you away from basic things that you should be doing for your baby because you're only worried about safety. You're only worried about, can I get out of this house? Can I find someone who can help me? You're not worried about, make sure you take care of yourself and eating and engaging in self care. And so I think intimate partner violence overall during the perinatal period, it just is a huge distraction that pulls people away from who they really are and experiencing the beauty of having a baby.
Yeah. Maria, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Leslie. I think it's really important that we're having these conversations because the perinatal period really starts from pregnancy and conception until the child is about a year old. So it's quite a long time. And during this time, it's actually been studied, and the numbers show that a lot of women actually experience more increase of violence during pregnancy. It's a very vulnerable time, and like Dr. Leslie mentioned, it kind of puts you in a mindset of survival mode, right? Which it really clouds your ability to parent, to take care of yourself, to do other things that you would normally do if you weren't in this situation. So it can have a lot of impact on your physical health, on the baby's health. So there's been reports of low birth weight, any increase of like physical diseases like high blood pressure, things like that. So it is a really unsafe period, specifically because during pregnancy we tend to rely on others, right, for a lot of things, for emotional support, to attend appointments and things like that. So it can be a really dangerous time for birthing people to experience. So oftentimes it does increase during pregnancy. A lot of women, it is sometimes our first instinct is to congratulate someone and say, like, hey, like, this is really good. This is a really happy time. But a lot of the times, some of these women have been forced to have these children and have been taken away the choice to whether elect or not that they were ready to be mothers or parents at that time. So it can be quite a difficult time, and it can increase the risk of experiencing perinatal mood disorders like anxiety, postpartum depression, PTSD, and all of those things.
Yeah. Go
Can
ahead, Dr.
I?
Leslie. Hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned the vulnerability, and this is a huge vulnerable time in the life of a single mom, especially a single mom who's already isolated, who might be in a toxic relationship, one after another. And if she's experiencing intimate partner violence, she may not want to tell anyone that she's experiencing that. And so she doesn't have support for herself or her baby, which puts her in a more vulnerable position to develop postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety. And I think that's something that needs to be talked about more, is that vulnerable time of a single mom's life where she needs all the support she can get because she's doing it alone. Or she might have a partner who's in the home and they're not married, who is creating more stress and more toxicity in that household.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think thank you both for that. I think, Maria, when you said earlier, that IPV can also include reproductive abuse, like
Mhm.
refusal for the male partner to use contraception, refusal to allow, the woman or female birthing person to use contraception of any kind. And I wonder if either of you or both of you can kind of touch on this myth that in committed relationships, right? Like marriage or committed partnerships, or even in sexual relationships that have had some consensual. There's been consensual sex in the past. That there can be sexual abuse in those relationships, right? And until you all said this, I hadn't thought, like, sometimes people are pregnant and it wasn't, either they didn't want to be, or this was the result of a non-consensual encounter inside of a committed relationship. So can you talk a little bit about, does sexual and that kind of interpersonal violence look different in committed relationships or marriages, or how do we help people navigate? Because some people, and I've heard people say this, say, well, he's your husband, he
Yeah.
can't be sexually abused or raped by your husband. Well, isn't that your boyfriend? Don't you guys have sex all the time? Like, he can't have done that to you. And so what are you talking about? You guys sleep together. That's what happens when you sleep together without protection. You get pregnant. So what do you mean this is not abuse? Can either let's go with you. Let's start with you, Maria. Like, can you clarify? Does
Sure.
it look different in a committed relationship?
It can oftentimes look different just because of, what you mentioned, that it's often so normalized that you are in a relationship and this is kind of your role. This is something that happens in a relationship, that it's not very normalized that, you are allowed to say no. And then once you do say no, and no is a no, no matter if this person is your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or you're in a committed relationship, in a marriage, once the person has expressed not wanting to engage in any sexual activity, or specifically says, like, I'm not ready to be pregnant and I'm not ready to engage in sexual activity, it can be quite different when you're telling your husband no, right? Because in society, it's just not normalized and it's not talked about enough. And a lot of times when I've met with, especially with first time moms, younger moms, um I've had to have discussions with them where that was the first time that they realized that they had been sexually abused by their partners.
Mhm.
And it's a very hard reality to come to because this is the person that you have chosen to spend your life with. And then the feelings of guilt, the feelings of, many times partners gaslighting you and stating, like, this is your role, this is what you're supposed to do. You're my partner, this is what we do. And it can be quite difficult to make that difference, of, well, I'm still an individual even if I'm in this relationship, and I am allowed to say no. It's okay for me to say no, and it's okay for me not to want to have a child at this time or engage in sexual activity. But I think once there's a marriage or a committed relationship, I think the lines get a little bit blurred, and this conversation has not been brought up enough or normalized enough where people have the safety or the space to process what's happened in the relationship, when oftentimes, they kind of rely on their partners and they tend
Mm,
to think of that as their safe space. And all of a sudden, like, you have a provider telling you, like, no, this has been sexual abuse, or this is not okay. And it's really hard to come to terms with, especially if you are in a relationship.
yeah. Dr. Leslie, anything else? I'm just wondering about the subtleties in these kinds of relationships, right? Like there might be um some some people are very good at manipulating and
Mhm.
making, their partner feel this obligation. And so how do you in a committed relationship, how do you distinguish, how do you walk that line if you are the person feeling pressured? Um, and what kinds of things have you heard people tell themselves or say to themselves to justify like why maybe this wasn't an abusive situation?
Mhm. I think when you're in a situation like that, it's very easy to feel the shame and the guilt is heightened. And because of that, you'll ignore red flags. And I think the way to address that is to really have boundaries, like have boundaries from the very beginning of your relationship and know that those boundaries can change when needed. And so if you're in an unsafe or unhealthy relationship, you may have to implement new boundaries with your partner. And that can
Mm,
include, not wanting to have sex for a period of time, and that's okay, or not wanting to be intimate, in whatever way for a period of time, and that's okay. And being okay to say, this is what I need right now from you. And if you cross that boundary, this is what I'm going to do about that. I
mm,
think women just need to be empowered to speak up for what they need, and not feel any shame that because I'm already in this relationship, that if this person is not respecting my boundary, that I can get out if I need to or if I want to. But knowing that when there's violence involved, it's a little trickier. It can be
yeah.
scary. It can feel like you're alone in that situation where you don't even know how to get out of that situation. You're just stuck. A lot of women do feel stuck, especially when there's a child involved. And they'll stay longer if they become pregnant because, well, I don't want to have a family without my partner involved,
Yeah.
or I don't want to raise a child by myself. That was never my plan. So I have to stick this out. And you'll continue to ignore your own boundaries in those situations.
Yeah, yeah. And I think sometimes it's hard um, to draw these boundaries or make set boundaries and hold to them if your partner is in your perception the most supportive person in your life, right? If if there has been this pattern which happens kind of gradually over time of sometimes them isolating you from other people, and so you don't have real connections outside of that relationship, right? That's an intentional thing
Hmm.
um, that abusers do, so that you have no other connections. And so now, holding the boundary with somebody who is my, like you said, my person, my safe space, my, the one that I've decided to commit to, and now I don't have connections with the other people who I used to, or those connections don't feel as secure as this. How do you hold the boundary? And also, you said something. It's. I've heard the statistic that it takes a person at least seven times. It's like the average
Yeah.
of of attempting to leave an abusive relationship, and that's attempting to leave and then coming back to that same relationship, like,
Yeah.
but 7 times before they'll eventually leave permanently. So um, I'm assuming that part of that is because of that isolation that happens and not having um, other supports outside of that, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
how do you draw and hold those boundaries, and why is it so hard for people to do that and to leave and stay gone?
That shame is so strong.
Yes.
You can say, "Oh, who wants to tell their friends I'm in a toxic relationship?" Or tell their family, like, "This person you think is so great, they're really not that great." I'm
Hmm.
trying to leave them. They're hurting me. They're hurting our kids. No one wants to admit that. And when you do finally admit that, that puts you in a vulnerable position because you can be hurt by that, or people are not going to believe you. And you end up going back because you have nowhere else to go. And that isolation, I think of it like carbon monoxide poisoning. Like, it's very sneaky. You don't
Yeah.
see it coming. It happens very slowly, and then all of a sudden you have no one in your life, no one in your corner that can help you get away when you need to. Which is, it's really great that there's so many domestic violence shelters, and the hotlines that are available, because a lot of people just don't know where to go, but there are resources available in people's communities.
Yeah. It's really hard to take that first step, especially if if it's not a safe place to set boundaries. And like Dr. Leslie mentioned, the isolation is one of the greatest and the biggest risk factors that keep people from leaving these relationships. And then oftentimes it does take a lot of time, because especially if their children included in in this family system, right? It's if the person doesn't have anywhere to go, if they're financially dependent on this other person, it can be a really hard reality to all of a sudden have to explain to your family. And I want to bring, culture into this as well. A lot of the times
Yes.
we do have people that support us, but maybe our families are telling us, you have to keep the family intact.
Mhm.
So you go to the people that, are supposed to be there to support you, but maybe they're not telling you the things that you want to hear or that you should hear, and in order to be feel empowered to leave this relationship. So it can oftentimes be really hard to, just leave. It's really hard, and a lot of the times the mortality rate increases during the period of a woman or a birthing person or a person experiencing intimate partner violence, when they try to leave the situation. So it oftentimes takes a lot of safety planning and just honestly having a conversation with yourself and leaving those patterns and like taking back control, because that's what it's all about, right? Like taking the control back that has been taken away from you for so long. But it's hard if you have depended on this person for so long and you really have nowhere to go or a safe space to kind of communicate all these things that are happening.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially if you're thinking, I'm glad you brought that cultural piece up. Um, and I'm thinking about, the encouragement, especially being I'm a black single woman now, right? Um, I'm not having no more kids. I have, it's a blessing, and that's no more babies coming out the factory. But I can imagine the pressure that I think women in general feel to across, racial and ethnic groups, feel to partner, and then once you're partnered to have a child, right? And I know, especially for Black women, and the statistics about the rates at which we marry, the age at which we marry being so much higher, our rates of marriage lower. And so there's this pressure once you find someone, especially if you find someone who's willing to commit or marry you,
Mm,
to stay with that, to stay with that person, because it's so hard. It's like there's no good men out here, right? Everybody is, so you deal with what you have to deal with, right? And that might be some of the narrative coming from the older members of our of our family, those older
Yeah.
generations, right? Or from some of the other institutions that we hold dear to. Like sometimes it's coming from our religious
Yeah.
institutions, right? And so, and especially if you are pregnant or just recently had a child, um, and this idea of not wanting to reinforce stereotypes of like being a baby's mama, or I
Mhm.
don't want to, I don't want you. You have a good man he might be willing to do the things that need to be done in order to provide financially for you and the baby, but nobody knows what else is happening at home. But you feel that pressure, and you've had this story told to you, this narrative that you've said that you've come to understand and live, right? As a woman of color, about wanting it, keeping the family together and being in a relationship, and sometimes having to accept some of the bad behavior on the part of the partner,
Hmm.
just so that you can have your family intact.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, how does that show up, like, during the the perinatal period, or in times when you all have worked with women or families, and I can imagine people wrestling with this idea of, like, I don't want to do this by myself, or my mom or my grandmother would be so disappointed if I left this man. I've heard old women say, "Man doesn't really love you unless he hits you," or "What are
Mhm.
you doing to provoke him?"
Mhm.
Uh, so, kind of, how have you seen or heard that show up? Those kinds of factors, Dr. Leslie, as you're working with people.
Yeah, that financial piece is huge. I think once you have an infant and you have all these diapers to buy and formula, and there's been a formula shortage lately,
Yeah.
when you have a partner, even if they're toxic, you're like, okay, you're going to pay for this. You can stay around because I can't afford it. I don't have a job. I can't go to work. So I'm trying to take care of this baby. And you're here so you can help me out. And I just have to endure this pain for a little bit until I can get on my feet somehow. I've heard some clients that they struggle with that financial piece because they can't ask their families. They've had multiple children and they're like, I'm not helping you with another kid. You got to do it on your own now. That
Mhm.
cycle just keeps repeating. And it might be the same partner that they've had these children with. And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
we've told you to leave him in the past. You're still there. I'm not going to help you anymore. And they end up getting stuck and feeling trapped, and they don't have any other way out. And they don't feel like they can. I think when they have multiple children involved, they get to this place where they don't feel like they're even worthy of being in a better relationship, and so they just stay longer.
Right. Like, you have to take what you can get.
Hmm.
Or, I did this to myself now. I've made this bed, I've got to lie in it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And,
Yes. Especially if the person has tried to leave once and they return to the relationship, there's oftentimes that shame of, well, this is something that I've been through. I've already told my family. My family doesn't like my husband, and here I go again. I go back with the same partner. So that shame, the financial instability, just having to, wanting to rely on someone. And I think it's a hard realization when you in your head you make all these plans and have all these dreams of having an intact family, right? Especially if you've come
Mhm.
from a broken family. So oftentimes we really stick to these dreams and these ideas of what a marriage should be like, what a partnership should be like. And oftentimes it's things such as, what I just need to have someone with me. I don't want to raise my children alone.
Mm.
And a lot of the times also just having those conversations, right? And like, what does that look like for you? What does a healthy relationship look like for you? How do you feel when you're with your partner? Like, is this something that you picture when you did picture having an intact family? And, what does that look like for you and how do you feel? The safety aspect of it, I think, is what keeps most people. And, just having that other person to raise your child with. I come from a family of a single mom. My mom is a superwoman. She raised three of us alone, but I could see how hard it was for her. And
Mm.
for a lot of our families, they oftentimes find themselves, especially first time moms. In my previous role, I work with all first time moms, and some of them were experiencing intimate partner violence, and they oftentimes would tell me, well, I told my family and they kind of just told me to stay and wait for him to change, or what did you do to stress him out, or
Mhm.
you just had a baby. It's hard, it's always hard during this time. But I think just really normalizing the conversations and really pointing out, like, these are the red flags that you should be looking out for. And love shouldn't hurt, love shouldn't feel this way, a partnership shouldn't feel this way.
Mm.
Just like being a little bit more honest. And also the way that we sometimes, the resources that we give these families, right? Like, especially for our population and people of color, a lot of times I've heard providers say, well, if something happens, just call the police, just call the
Mhm.
police. And historically, our populations, we've been oppressed by the justice system, and it's not so easy to just call the police and tell them, my husband. And especially if the violence is not physical, it's a lot harder to talk about it and process. So, if you call the police and you're telling them, like, hey, my husband yelled at me or he's putting me down, it's a lot hard to report. And then now you're getting, people that are supposed to be there for you, are supposed to help you, they're not believing you. So it's a lot harder to just step away from those situations.
Yeah.
And involving the police is another vulnerable position to be in, because the police can look at the situation and blame her too
Yeah.
and say, well, I'll just take both of you to jail. And then what happens to the child? Or the police can come and look at the home and there's all these other issues and they involve DFS or DCFS. And then that child is taken from the home. And it's tricky to do that. Like, should you call the police? Maybe, but is it going to make
Hmm.
it better? Probably not.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So what can family members of people who are in this perinatal period, they're pregnant or they're like a year or so postpartum, and they're having this struggle with interpersonal violence, I'm sorry, intimate partner violence, because IPV can be interpersonal violence too. But they're having this struggle, or there's some there's some abuse going on in the home, and this person is left before, and they may have gone back several times. Like, what can I do if it's my daughter, my sister, my cousin, my best friend, and she's left before and now she's going back and now she's saying, I need your help. What advice would you give to the loved ones of people who are in this situation?
That is such a great question, because I don't think anyone ever thinks of
Yeah.
what should family members do to help. But I think focus on the baby. Like, if you turn the focus on the child, the mom's going to start focusing on her baby too. And just knowing that she's not going to leave just because you're there to help. Not assuming that just because you're saving her, that she's going to leave that relationship, and don't expect her to. And if she wants to stay, that's on her, but you can still provide that emotional support. You can provide safety. You can provide financial support. Bring some diapers, and I think even being in the home, that that short period of time that you're in the home with them, her partner is most likely not going to do anything while you're there, so that can create a sense of safety, or allow her to get outside, or um, even just having some genuine adult time that she's not ever. She's probably not talking to anybody else. She's probably not talking to her friends.
Mhm.
So she needs, some healthy connection. And that little burst of healthy connection in person is so vital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
I
I,
agree. I agree. And, just adding a little bit more to that, I think from the perspective of a family member, it can be very exhausting, right? To have to support this person. And I also want to validate and acknowledge that it can be very tiring as a person who doesn't have a lot of knowledge or is not going through the situation. But it's so important for our family members and our friends to really be that person to even just offer to listen and to believe me. And whenever I'm disclosing something to you, even if it's a third, fourth time that I'm repeating, some of these things that are happening at home, to just please validate and really empower the women and the birthing people in your life. Because it takes a lot of courage to talk about these things, and it takes a lot of courage to leave. And like Dr. Leslie mentioned, just offering some companionship, a listening ear, that can make such a great difference. And just, really being there for that person and believing them when they are voicing their concerns, and some of the things that are happening that maybe they weren't brave enough to talk about before, or maybe they didn't realize before. It's
Mm,
just really important to listen to what they're saying, and believing them. I think it's the most crucial part of the support that somebody can offer.
right. And I think that's a good point. You both made such good points. And that even with the being in the home, like, and for that short period of time, like you said, Dr. Leslie, like it, and that gives sort of a reprieve. But being in the home, being there, and also listening to and believing and validating helps to build this sense of value in the person. Like I care, I value, I want to. I know you need help. You might not even ask me for the help that you really need, but let me do what I can. Let me bring the diapers. Let me listen to you without judgment or criticism. Do you think that is okay for those loved ones, family members, friends to say to that person, like, "Hey, you might need help. Have you talked to somebody? Do you need the number for a hotline, or do you need? Have you thought about going to counseling, therapy, or something like that? Is that okay, or do you think that that's um, too much? Is that pushing too much?"
No, I think that's totally appropriate because
Mm,
a lot of women who are in these relationships, they may not see anything wrong with it. And so it takes one person to open their eyes like, hey, this is not okay. What you're experiencing, this is not safe for you. It's not safe for your baby. This is wrong. And for
Hmm.
someone to be very blunt about that, this is wrong. You need to get out. You're not okay. And that support person, the family member, the friend, could be part of her safety plan. So when
Mm,
she is ready to go, she knows who she can call, and there's already a plan developed where she can get out quickly and safely, and there's no complications there.
yeah, good. So, what do you think that clinicians who are working with um, women and families in this period, this perinatal period, um, what should they know if about working with folks in this period who, and they find out that there's some inner oh my god, so
Yeah.
intimate partner violence or domestic violence happening in the home. Like domestic violence, especially if it's involving like children being abused, right? Most of us are mandated reporters, so we are going to have to report to the authorities, right? But if it's they see bruises, and you're an OB or you're a psychologist or social worker, you see bruises on mom's arm and she's come in for her routine session with you, or her routine like antepartum prenatal visit, and you're seeing bruises, like what how do you work with this is a really sensitive, right, subject,
yeah.
especially um, I've had clients who the partner hasn't insisted on coming into the room for the session, but wants to wait in the waiting room or wants to wait in the car, and that he's my way here. And so, how do you navigate? How do you recommend working with? What are some tips you can give people?
Oh, this is such an important conversation, and I'm really glad that you brought this up because, oftentimes we know that pregnancy and early motherhood, that's when women have increased interactions, especially with medical providers. And I think that's such a crucial time for early intervention. So, starting to screen women a lot more often. And I know during appointment times, it feels very rushed. It feels rushed. There's also a mistrust of the medical system for whatever reason. You know, maybe past experiences, you didn't feel heard by your medical providers or even your clinicians. So, taking the time for providers to be trained and be informed, to be aware of those warning signs, right? If you feel like your patient is coming into the room and or all of a sudden they're missing a lot of appointments, just like being aware of those things, because that can be a sign of violence, right? Preventing people from attending their appointments and accessing medical care. So
Yes.
just being informed, being trained, and really being aware of those warning signs of violence, right? Is the partner overly jealous? Is he inserting himself in these appointments, right? Because many times a lot of women don't want their partners to be in their room, and they're allowed to say no and they're allowed to say yes. So just being more attuned to these maybe red flags that are happening in the office, missing appointments, and just being more aware of the resources in your community so you're able to help out the birthing people that are coming into your practices, and for providers to just be trained and be more informed on how to normalize these conversations. So if a person comes into my office and they do have a bruise, I can say like, hey, like, I've noticed that you have a bruise on your arm. Is everything okay? What's happening? And just flowing, having a little flow in that conversation, right? Like, how are you feeling at home? How's your partner? How are they supporting you? Not not directly saying, is this person abusing you, because that can feel very scary. And oftentimes as a women, as birthing people, we take ownership for a lot of the things that are happening in our lives,
Mhm.
because it can oftentimes feel very shameful that we know something is wrong and we're not leaving, so we're scared to talk about it. So
Mm.
normalizing these conversations in a way that they're trauma informed, that they're sensitive to people's cultures, I think that's crucial during this period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Dr. Leslie?
Oh, yes, there's so much. No, all of that, I totally agree with that. For clinicians specifically, I would say be mindful of the cycle of abuse and where that mom is in that cycle. And knowing that she may come to you for therapy for one session, two sessions, three sessions, and then all of a sudden she ghosts you, and you can't take that personal. And you may not be able to hold her accountable the same way that you do other clients because there's violence in her relationship. She may
Mm-hmm.
be, beaten up so badly she doesn't want to come to the office, or she doesn't want to get on a Zoom call with you because she doesn't want you to see what happened. She's ashamed. And so knowing that that cycle of abuse is happening and that you might be part of that cycle with her, and just kind of creating a safe space and focusing on her safety, not necessarily focusing on her relationship, is totally important. I would say don't worry about the why. Why are you still there? Why are
Mhm.
you still allowing this to happen to you? But just focus on, how can I help you? What do you need right now? And if she doesn't know, you should be trained well enough to say, this is what you need. These are some red flags happening right now. I'm going to point these things out. And I think for myself, I just operate this way. You have to be very honest, and don't sugarcoat anything for her. Tell her exactly what's going on, what's wrong, how she can fix it, know the resources, and know that she's not going to call right away, but when she's ready, she will.
Yeah. And I think it's important also, especially if you're working with communities and people of color, to understand the hesitancy that people might have about naming this, especially if their partner is a person of color, or a male or male identified person of color too, because of, I think we mentioned earlier, this our relationship with the authorities has not, as a community, has not always been positive, right? And so there's always this hesitancy to, especially if you're a provider who's a person that's not a person of color, for me to tell you that my black husband is abusing me. um, I don't want to get, what I'm going to be responsible for another man of color being, reported and caught up in systems that are wrought with systemic racism and oppression and all these other kind of things, and I'm already feeling guilty of perhaps about what's happening to me personally. Like some of this I feel the shame, and like some of this is my fault, like I've driven him to this, and now it's going to be my fault if he gets caught up in a system that really is set up not to rehabilitate or to help us, but really to just further oppress us. Like there's that happens too, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's important to realize, and I don't know if this is, across the nation, but there are programs for victims, but there are also programs for abusers. And we
Mm,
have to know what those resources are. And most times the programs for abusers are court mandated, but
Mhm.
there are times when, the partner might say, "Yes, I do have a problem and this has been a problem in my life for a while and I am ready to get help too."
mm.
So I think knowing how to support both parties is important.
Yeah, it's absolutely important.
Yeah,
Thank you for
that's
saying
great.
that. Yeah. So what would you say now? So you have a pregnant mama, or there might be a postpartum mom watching who's already been struggling, like this being pregnant, having this baby is not what I thought it was going to be, and I have this additional thing of maybe I didn't realize even that there was some abuse happening, but now I'm starting to think that there is. Like, what would you say to someone watching who feels like they're hearing themselves in their situation in this? What would you say to them? What should they do? What's the next right step for them? Maria?
Well, the first thing is for anyone out there that is feeling and like they are in an intimate partner violence, so they're experiencing any type of violence, you're not alone, which I know that doesn't make things any better, but that's to say that there is help out here. There are people who care about you. There are people who are willing and ready to help you and offer you the resources that you need to get to safety. And that safety road and the healing road is often a long and not linear not linear one, and it is going to be really hard. It's going to be really hard to get out of that situation. I don't want to take away those feelings from anyone who may be going through this, but there are people and places in place to support you, and you know it takes just one step to get out of that situation, which is often the hardest step, but there are people out there who are here for you and here to support you. And just seeking assistance from any trusted individual. It doesn't have to be a clinician, it doesn't have to be a doctor, it doesn't have to be, your obstetrician. It could be a friend, it could be a family member. Relying on them and starting to get that power back that was taken away from you from however long you've been in this situation. But there is help out there, and there are a lot of people in your community who will be there to help you and your children.
Yeah. Dr. Leslie?
And I'll add that there are plenty of resources online that are available. Two that I really trust is loveisrespect.org. And there's
Mm,
another website. It's the National Coalition Against Violence, NCADV, I think. I can't remember the acronym. But both of those websites they're designed where if you click on them and let's say your partner is monitoring your browsing history, there's a way for you to exit out of those sites securely where there's no history of you going to that site. So those are two sites that will give you lots of information with statistics, with tips on how to get yourself safe, even learning about red flags and what a healthy relationship looks like. And so if you're not ready to talk to anyone, those sites also have these hotline numbers. If you're not wanting to talk to someone that you know personally or to a counselor, you can text someone there, or you can have an actual phone conversation with them, and they can connect you to other local resources. Like there's a domestic violence shelter that you need. The other thing I would add is, making sure that you do keep safety in mind for your child.
mm,
And if there's any time where you feel like the abuse is too much, where the violence has gotten completely out of hand, that your baby may not be safe, is get your baby away. Maybe have somebody watch your child for a couple of days if necessary. As much as that might hurt, it might be the best thing that you can do for yourself and your child.
yeah. So we,
I wanna know for the people who do reside in New York City, there we have family justice centers in every borough of the city, and it's kind of like a one-stop shop for people who are experiencing domestic violence and intimate partner violence to come to the center. All services are free, and it's kind of like I mentioned, a one-stop shop where you can get legal services, counseling, any type of health, shelter information, housing, case management. And they oftentimes have an officer on site who is trained in intimate partner violence. So if you're not feeling comfortable with going to the police station, you can make a report at the Family Justice Center. So, like Dr. Leslie mentioned, just being aware of those resources in the community.
yeah.
Can I add one more resource?
Yes.
Because one thing we didn't talk about was something that keeps women in these relationships longer is when they have a pet, which
Oh,
some people
yes.
have pets that feel like their babies. Um,
Oh, wow.
there's a project, and I don't know if it's across the nation again, but I know here in the St. Louis area, there's what's called the Purple Leash Project. And
Mm.
so that is a resource for women who are victims that have a pet to keep their pet safe and themselves safe.
I'd never even thought about that. Wow. But especially if that is it's a pet that you all bought together. Like
Yeah.
It's
it's
your
your
baby.
baby. Right. Oh wow. That is a really good resource. And a really good point. Thank you, Dr. Leslie. I want to thank both of you for being with us and also for sharing a little bit of yourselves and your stories. But this has just been a great conversation. And I want for those of you watching who feel like maybe I've hurt myself in these stories, maybe I've hurt myself here, maybe I have, I think that I need some help. Again, you can reach out to anybody, your family, friends. You can also call. You'll see the numbers for the PSI helpline and the maternal mental health hotline scrolling. And so, one of the good things is that if you feel like you are experiencing something that's a little bit more than just being down or blue after having a baby, right? You can call the maternal mental health hotline or the PSI helpline, and there will be someone there that can help you. The helpline, we have English and Spanish counselors. The maternal mental health hotline, which is a national hotline, is over 60 languages spoken. So, if you need to connect with somebody, but not only do you have people that can help get you connected with resources for um, postpartum depression and other perinatal mood disorders, but they're going to be able to help connect you to some other services too. The counselors on the maternal mental health hotline are all licensed clinical counselors, and so they're able to walk with you and talk with you through some of these other things, including if there's a domestic violence or intimate partner violence, and you find yourself in that situation. But if you feel like you are in a crisis where all the circumstances of your life have gotten you to the point where you feel like you may want to take your life, we want you to know that there is help for you too. You don't even have to dial 10 digits, right? Not even seven, just dial 988 wherever you are. And that is a crisis hotline. And there's someone there that can work with you, talk with you, and get you pointed in the right direction, okay? All right. So thank you so much, Dr. Leslie Davis. I'm going to mispronounce your last name, Maria. Thank you so much, Maria Guerra. Is that
Yep,
right?
that's right.
Yes. For joining me on this month's Calling the Conversation. Thank you all for watching and have a great day and a great weekend. All right. Bye bye now. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.